next session focuses on securing technological advantage through investment and innovation. Please join me in welcoming the moderator for this discussion, Heather Richman, entrepreneur in residence at BMNT and founder of the Defence Investor Network. Please also join me in welcoming our panelists, Kelly Bayer Rosmarin, Chief Executive Officer at Optus, Chief Baxter, Chief Executive Officer and founder of Beaton Venture Partners, Lourie, Senior Advisor at WestExec Advisors, and Kris Poria, Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of EarlyBirds. Welcome them to the stage.
This is on, testing, all right. Good morning. My name's Heather Richman. I love talking about this stuff, so you guys are gonna find that out in a minute here. I'm from California, actually it's a place called Silicon Valley in Menlo Park, California. I'm supposed to give kind of an overview of the panel. I'm not gonna do that, I'm gonna tell you about myself for a second, just to give some context, because then I'm gonna have actually each of our panelists spend a minute talking about themselves, kind of where they came from, how they got here. I think adding context and familiarity with the panel is important. And then we're gonna dig in. I hate 30,000-foot conversations. I'm too short for that, so we're gonna hopefully get into the weeds a little bit and actually get into some details about innovation, about private capital, about adversarial capital, about the speed and scale, all of that good stuff. We do have some microphones, and I know traditionally we leave questions to the end, but if you just can't help yourself, either wave your hand frantically or come to the microphone, but there will be time at the end as well. So as our moderator suggested, so I'm based in Silicon Valley, spent a number of years in Washington, D.C. working on policy, and actually came out to Silicon Valley in 2004. I've been there for a number of years, and I've worked with innovators, I've worked at Stanford University, all the things. And I think one thing learning and living there, we've realized is really the power of private capital, the power of speed of innovation out in the private sector. A couple of years ago, though, we started realizing there was a concept around adversarial capital. We've got some countries that we will name during this panel that are causing some problems, stealing IP, that sort of thing. And so my dear friend Linda here, who will introduce herself in a moment, has done a lot of work inside of our government around adversarial capital. So we'll be touching on that. But kind of through that process, we started to talk about the concept of trusted capital. What is trusted capital? Trusted capital is when you've got a mission-critical capability, a mission-critical technology that is national security relevant. Making sure that the people that are funding that, the people that are on their board, the people that are working in the company are trusted and can be trusted. So in June of 2019, we actually started bringing together, we started with Silicon Valley investors, later brought in investors from Boston, from New York, from all around our country, to start talking about these concepts, because we've got, when you're starting a fund, a venture fund or a private equity fund, you have what are called LPs or limited partners. Who those people are and where their money comes from, and even more importantly, what their motivations are is important. And that was something that our country was not paying attention to, which is pretty shocking. So from about 2010 to about 2018, there was at least, that we can account for, about $22 billion in Chinese capital that came into Silicon Valley. Those investments were being made in semiconductor companies, hypersonics companies, cyber companies, AI companies, quantum companies, you name it, they were there. We're seeing the effects of that today. As you know, the face of global conflict has completely changed. It's not only kinetic war anymore. Economic warfare, IP warfare, these are all very real. And so out of that was born something called the Defense Investor Network, which is about between 250 and 300 now US investors that come together monthly, regularly, giving feedback to high-level government officials or high-level advisors about these concepts and what we can do to be changing them. It's we kind of call it Fight Club. There's not a newsletter or a website. It's really just a kind of below-the-radar conversation that we're having in America. About a year and a half ago, we've done some work here in Australia, and my colleague Jamie Watson and I started DIN Australia. And I was actually in London last week launching the DIN UK. And so this idea of, as we talk about public-private partnerships or allied partnerships, we're really looking at really connecting our countries on the private capital side, so that as innovators here in Australia are innovating national security critical capabilities and they want to get into the pipeline to get either capital or frankly contracts in the United States of America or in the UK, we're trying to create those pathways and make them simpler. That's something that's being done outside of government, and I think that's really important to say. I come from government, many of us have done work in government, and it's very natural, I think, to think these things need to happen inside of government. I love government, I think it's very important. But I think also mobilizing and incentivizing, and we'll get into the incentives part later, the private capital component to that I think is really important. And we're not talking about philanthropy in any way. These are very realistic, very lucrative investments. We're also going to use the word signal during this conversation. Something that we've needed our government to do is to tell us what they need. And not, again, in these 30,000 level foot terms as far as we need energy, we need cyber, we need AI, got it. What do you need it for? What exactly do you need? And how are we going to then incorporate that or transition that into a legacy system such as the US military? So I'll stop there. I'm going to have actually each of our panelists introduce themselves with some background, and then we'll dig in. Kelly.
Well, thank you very much for having me on the panel today. I guess I'm an engineer who was lucky enough to get a scholarship to study at Stanford University. So I graduated from there and then worked in Silicon Valley in the startup environment. I worked for a company that had one of the top 10 IPOs in '99 during the dot-com boom, and I stayed with them through the dot-com crash. So got to see the full life cycle of a company from its first customer to its last. And we sold ourselves to an established company, and I worked there for a while. Then I moved to Australia and worked for the Boston Consulting Group as a consultant for a while, and then joined the world of banking. And I was at the Commonwealth Bank for 14 years, 5 of those on the executive team leading the institutional bank. My passion is innovation and how to drive innovation at scale. And I brought that passion to bear by leading a lot of the innovation at Commonwealth Bank, including running their payments council and doing a number of world-first payments innovations. After leaving there, I joined Optus, so shifted industries to telecommunication. And once again, we're leading the world in the way that we're innovating our network, having introduced the concept of a living network, a network that's not a set and forget stationary network in the background, but one that comes alive for our customers where they have control over their connectivity. It's so fundamental to how people live their lives. Why shouldn't you be able to pause it when you need a digital detox, or dial it up because you need priority on the network today, or change the speed because you're utilizing too much bandwidth in your home tomorrow? So all of that is live in our app, really exciting. And I look forward to discussing all the topics today. I also want to add that I was honoured last year to be elected as a fellow of the Australian Academy for Technology, Science and Engineering. So also very passionate about building up skills in STEM and technology in Australia.
Awesome.
Well, that's cool. Steve Baxter, g'day, I'm from Queensland. My first career was a soldier for 9 years, 87 through 95, before we started fighting wars. Got out to start a telecoms business, so I'm a twice-washed ex-telecoms entrepreneur, building fibre network, initially dial-up internet, then fibre networks, data centres, and we built a submarine cable from Sydney to Guam before selling that company. I then worked for Google in California for a year. I got there 3 weeks after Lehman Brothers fell over in 2008. That was exciting. I'm now an early stage investor. I've about 78 investments. I've got about $120 million deployed through those companies, mostly early stage software tech. I've just started in the last 6 months a business called Beaten Zone Venture Partners. And those in the audience who understand what a beaten zone is probably know what we do. We're early stage investors in sovereign companies, increasing our capability and lethality and survivability. So we like the sharp things. If ESG hates it, we probably like it. So I'm actually out to try and deploy private capital because I know that government's very bad at it. Any large organisation, sorry Kelly, is very bad at innovation. Governments especially so, and armed forces even more so. So the more you can actually take the impediments off private capital and let them do it and let them risk, which is what they're good at and they enjoy doing for some crazy reason, the better the outcome. So I'm out to sort of drive things in that direction. We're opening a fund soon, Beaten Zone Venture Partners, so if you want to get stuck into something like that, give me a bell. Thank you.
Linda.
Great. Good day. Was that right? Yeah. I'm excited to be here. I recently left the White House in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, where I was Assistant Director for Research and Technology Security. What I did in the day was I worked on CFIUS. the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States when we review investments, foreign investments into U.S. businesses. I worked with, I see Tanya Monroe in the audience, worked with Tanya on AUKUS in the early days of working on innovation and trying to understand what AUKUS should look like in this sector. Export controls, trusted capital, as Heather mentioned, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Before that, I was at the Pentagon, where I started up the Trusted Capital Marketplace, which, unusual for government, is standing up a program that when it fails, you pack it up and you put it away. And sort of, the culture in Silicon Valley is to fail and fail fast. And I was trying to bring that into the Pentagon, where it's very unusual to recognize failure and learn from it. I did learn that when I was out in Silicon Valley as the General Counsel of the Defense Innovation Unit, which is a Department of Defense agency working in Silicon Valley to accelerate procurement of early stage, or not early stage, but commercial technology into the Defense Department and send it down to the warfighter. I also worked in the Obama White House in export controls. So I've sort of been in this sector for a long time. Now I'm in the private sector and advising companies on all these kinds of things, but also I'm a consultant for back at the Pentagon. It's hard to stay away. There's too much fun things going on in the Pentagon and in the Office of Strategic Capital, which I hope we'll get into.
Absolutely. Chris.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you for the opportunity to talk here. My background is I started as a C++ programmer and worked from India to then Europe to US and came to Australia around 20 years back. From there onwards, I've been working in a number of other businesses that I've run, but also helping a lot of big companies like Oracle's of the world to help them to work with customers here in APAC region. And as part of that, actually, along with my co-founder here, Jeff Penrose, and we identified a gap in the market when we were working with a very big customer where my system integrator didn't want to use a local product from a startup. And we started realizing that there's a big gap in the market where a lot of these customers, when they are looking for innovation, they are normally being advised by big system integrators or big consulting companies. And we realized that we need to break that barrier. So we started this EarlyBirds as a platform at that time. It's interesting, actually. We were working with a lot of incubators and accelerators here in Australia, as well as globally. But very soon, we started realizing that the concept we had is not going to be successful unless we apply AI and machine learning and scale our capabilities to find these innovators globally. So what we are doing now is we have become a kind of open source intelligence platform that is capturing and monitoring global industry capabilities across every country, literally. We look into what are the capabilities they are building, what are the capacities, who are the people behind these organizations, who is investing in those organizations, who are those investors, and then we build very specific ecosystem maps around emerging technology, around domain that our customers might be interested in, or even looking into a specific region, which could be a state, for example, within Australia. So we have been lucky. Actually, we got Office of National Intelligence and Defense. We have been working with them. We have already worked on a couple of very good initial projects, like mapping out cybersecurity, who is doing what globally, and how can we identify what are the stages of the capability that we can try, et cetera, et cetera. But today, I think I'm going to talk about kind of new ideas that I'm going to propose today as part of this panel. And I think I'm going to discuss that as we progress through. Thank you.
Terrific. So I'll say in the US, in Silicon Valley, I'd say even as recent as 2015, kind of the trend was that investors and venture capitalists didn't want their startups working with government for a long time. It was opaque, it was slow. I think, again, the former face of war was about weapon systems and big things made of metal. Now it's very, very different. And so as you guys, as investors and as innovators and as folks who know the government so well, what has, we won't even get into what has the role of government been, but what should the role of government be and that could be a very positive thing, or are there certain impediments that you think specifically should be removed? Steve?
So I think government comprehensively fails when it comes to innovation, essentially. I think that the best thing that they've done in innovation in Australia in the last 5 years, 2017, whatever that is, 6 years, was Malcolm Turnbull's NISA, National Innovation Science Agenda. We introduced the ESIC, Early Stage Innovation Company, a tax rebate for investors investing in early stage businesses. That flooded money into the market. So for me, I'm a believer in private capital. I'm a believer in the market has more intelligence than any one person. So the more we can get the market participating in solving a problem, the better the outcome will be. And the best, for me, the best bang for buck over the years has been the tax incentives for either venture or early stage, essentially angel money into that space. It's given us the likes of the Canvas and the safety cultures and the God knows what else is out there. We need to replicate that in the investment space. Unfortunately, the other thing the government needs to do is they need to stop preferencing the toxin that is ESG through our investment community.
We're going to get to that.
All right.
Love it. I also need to talk to you about...
I'll just talk about signalling as well. You mentioned signalling, so I'll run on that.
Hit that.
We just have to tell, the government has to tell us what they want. Signalling sort of, to me, they're going to put a cipher around that when they actually say it. Just come out and tell us what they want. Tell us their problems, and you might be, tell us the problems, give us some incentives to try and fix those problems, and hey, presto, you might find them fixed. But don't couch the message, just tell us.
So one follow on that. So having that conversation between public and private can be sensitive or classified. What have you seen along the lines of easing that?
Well, so we're a private investor. We deal with secrets all the time, if you know what I mean, and people can hold secrets. But when it comes to private capital, there's no requirement to lift the top secret kimono. You literally, commercial and confidence is about as far as it's going to go. Same, we have a problem with drones. There's no secret. Same, we have a problem with China. There's no secret. Same, we have a problem with airborne missiles. There's no secret.
So just say it.
Just come out and say it. The Australian Army had this thing called Army Innovation Day. We went there in 2017, and they told industry two things, which was we have a problem with the drones and electronic warfare, and nothing else. And the range of solutions they got was amazing. The new Army Innovation Days, they are so tightly defining that square hole for that square peg to fit into. It's actually embarrassing. It's the opposite of innovation. So just speak loudly. I mean, you don't have to release national secrets to talk about problems.
I agree. We'll get back to the incentives because I want to hear more. Linda.
Well, I just wanted to put a couple of data points on the board. In the 50s and 60s, the U.S. Department of Defense spent 23% of the R&D in semiconductors was government R&D. After, and that was, I have a number, $4 to $6 million. And so it used to be the Defense Department, the government was the driver in innovation. But after the Vietnam War, there was a drop-off in support for military and for spending money, and then private capital picked up. But there's still a need, as you mentioned, for signaling. For instance, the CHIPS and Science Act that was passed in December and now is being implemented by the U.S. Commerce Department.
Just say a little more about what that is.
The CHIPS and Science Act, it's being implemented by the Commerce Department and the Defense Department to deploy $52 billion, US dollars, into both R&D and in manufacturing of chips in the United States. This recognizing, largely, but not exclusively, during the pandemic, where we realized, hey, we're not producing any of this here, and we need chips, and so we need to incentivize foreign manufacturers to come to the United States and produce chips as well as U.S. producers. So that's it's a huge amount of money, but it's not a lot of money. It's not enough money, but it's a good start. But we have other means of for which we can signal what the government is interested in buying in the future. So much of the early stage technology, it's just not ripe. It's not to scale, it's not refined, it's not ready for government use or military use. But it's also technology we don't want to see going to China, or in the olden days before Ukraine going to Russia. And so we do need to ensure that Private investors know that these technologies are going to be of interest and going to be procured by the defense departments, ours and yours, and around the world, allied militaries. And so we need to be signaling that. And we do that with loans and loan guarantees. And we do that with this new office that I mentioned, the Office of Strategic Capital.
Can you talk about that for a second?
Sure. So the Office of Strategic Capital at the Pentagon was just stood up in December, announced by Secretary of Defense Austin. This is an outgrowth of the trusted capital marketplace that I mentioned that I helped stand up a number of years ago, which I think of as aspirational. Trusted capital marketplace, we thought we would get great tech that didn't have Chinese Russian investment, and we thought we'd get patriotic investors who wanted to sign up and invest. What we found is we got technology that
it was second.
Even China didn't want to invest in. And then, I mean, nothing personal.
That was the signal that even they didn't want to invest in.
And then, and some of these great investors who are friends of ours just said, I can't tell you who my LPs are. I mean, I'm clean, but I can't reveal.
So we started the Defense Investor Network instead.
Exactly. And so, so the Office of Strategic Capital, or OSC, because everything in US DoD needs an acronym, has identified 14 tech areas that it is particularly interested in, and I can read those areas.
Go for it.
Biotech, quantum, 5G, advanced materials, trusted AI and autonomy, integrated networks, microelectronics, renewable energy and storage, advanced computing, human machines, directed energy, hypersonics, integrated sensing, and cyber. And these are areas in which the department recognizes we're going to be procuring, that likely we're not ready yet. The services aren't yet ready to procure in these areas. But we want to deploy loans and debt financing and investments, which is really new for the department to be investing. But to Steve's point, we're not looking to replace private capital. We're looking to signal and crowd in private capital. This is by no means interested in replacing. We need to be working with private investors.
Was the investment in the Australian company Hypersonic Launch Systems as a part of that, do you know? Or?
Can you speak into your mic?
Sorry,
Thanks.
there you go. Sorry. I can't.
Not yet.
We're still looking.
Not yet, sorry. The
Okay.
CEO was there, he said no. So
No,
I'll
but
be
the
quiet.
hypersonics mentioned yesterday, I don't know if David's here, I think I saw him earlier, is now a DIU company. Defense Innovation Unit, where I was the general counsel a number of years back. And that is a different method because that's procurement. That's actually buying stuff. That there's a Department of Defense customer who says, this is my problem, I need to have this capability. And DIU goes out into the market, finds the capability from the commercial sector, and has rapid acquisition.
Can I summarise that for the audience? Because that's an Australian, Queensland business, Queensland IP, Queensland-based business, Sydney CEO, don't forgive him for that, who are basically selling hypersonic technology to the US through a US government incentive program as a paraphrase. So that's an amazing sort of feat for Australia, to be honest, which is awesome.
And most of our early stage, government programs aren't open to folks outside the U.S. And so the DIU program is, and that is something that the U.S. is working quite a bit on to expand, so that, excuse us. So when Australia becomes our 52nd state, is that right?
52nd because District of Columbia should be the 51st.
that we are aggressively working on the U.S. side to expand, to be able to open up our early stage investment programs to folks in Australia and beyond. So for the entrepreneurs and the innovators here on our panel, when you hear about signaling from the Australian government, maybe even from the US government, how have you found out what they're looking for? How does that work? What do you hear? How do you communicate with them? What's working and what's not working?
Yeah, so I think one is that what we have seen is with the government that they need to focus on the capability edge instead of focusing on the procurement, because that's one of the key problem that as soon as they start thinking about something, they start thinking about the procurement, not thinking about what is the capability that they need. So that's the focus. And I think, as I mentioned initially, that I'm going to propose two initiatives. One of those initiatives is looking into how do we build that kind of capability edge accelerator for government, as well as, of course, in the private sector, because we have been working with some of the Fortune 500 companies along with government on this. So there are two areas we are proposing. One is that how do we enable, because all of us, we don't need to be building those capability as or technology edge for our society. We just need, as you might have heard about technology diffusion theory, according to that, there are only 2.5% of us who are innovators, and there are only 13.5% who are early adopters. What we need to do is we need to enable those 15, 16% of the people, and rest of us, we don't need to do anything. Let them do what they are good at. So that's one area. The second area is we have been kind of testing our, what we call it, fail fast, learn faster framework. We have been running that with a number of our customers. We have most probably run now 50, 60 times. And we can help not only the government, but also other relevant countries and other companies that are interested in using that. So we believe that most probably through that process, we can understand what are the capability needs, and then what should we be doing? What should we be doing before we start thinking about procurement? What's out there that we should be even testing and trialing before we even think about whether this thing is relevant for me? So that's the framework we are proposing.
Can I have a chat about that? Because I'm sorry, Kelly, but you said anything about capability, not procurement. Is that correct?
Correct.
So what I see out there, though, is you've actually got some amazing organisations in Australia, DOH to a point, Plan Jericho Air Force and some others, who are standing up, who are investing in amazing initial capability. They take it to the Australian Defence Force, who are the worst customer in the galaxy. And they say, yeah, no. They say, yeah, no, thanks, we don't want that. So, or, yes, we'll have it, but, you can't make 1,000 of them, therefore we're not going to even risk. So for a bunch of people who make their living out of being courageous, and I've got a lot of respect for them, they take very, very commercially gutless decisions. So I think what we actually need to do is back them to be able to say, we're going to take a risk on this company here, okay, so they've only built one of these in prototype, right, but let's order 15, let's take that risk. Yeah. They're not willing to do that because no one got fired by buying Boeing. That's the problem.
Well, I wanted to add a slightly different perspective, which is that in my experience, where you get really breakthrough innovation is where you explore a problem deeply and come up with a very customer-centric solution. And the exploration of a problem is underrated relative to the search for fitting capabilities to existing mindsets of how to solve problems. So I think the challenge for all of us is how do we carve out a space for real collaboration on deep problem exploration in a joint way. And an observation in Australia is that everybody seems to be very focused on which box they fit into. Are you in government? Are you in universities? Are you a big company or a small company? And they try and define why theirs is better and all the others have a perspective that's worth dismissing. And that was not my experience in Silicon Valley, where there's a lot more cross-collaboration. There's professors at universities who moonlight in startups. There's governments who do take chances on small companies. And there's a lot more circulation of talent between all those sectors. And I think in Australia, we're starting to see some of that emerge. So an example is the government put in place a program to provide seed funding for innovative 5G proposals. Optus and ANU University, we put together a proposal to try and have a look at how we could do something about bushfires, a known problem that needed deeper exploration, not a secret one, but that enabled us to stand up a really innovative trial of putting a mesh network of IoT sensors so we could try and detect the beginnings of bushfires very quickly and deploy technology to put it out fast before it spread and became a problem. Now, those sorts of things, I think, should be encouraged. We should do more of those. But it does mean coming with a mindset that isn't procurement-based, but problem exploration-based, and trust that every sector can contribute their expertise in a true collaborative spirit to come up with unique and interesting solutions.
So I didn't pay her to say that. So it's really interesting what you're talking about, because in the US about 7 years ago at Stanford, actually, there was a course started called Hacking for Defense. It was started by two former Special Forces colonels, Jeff Felter and Pete Newell. They still run it. They are launching it. Actually, tonight is the launch at Stanford. It's at about 60 universities now in the US. It's a graduate level course. It's at about 4 universities here in Australia. So Jamie Watson has started Hacking for Defense here. It's about 11 universities in the UK. Again, graduate level, but it's taking, I mean, the way you get true innovators and entrepreneurs excited about things is you give them a really audacious, hairy problem to solve. And she talks about bushfires. So we had a team that was actually looking at illegal fishing. They were looking at location detection of nuclear weapons in North Korea, but they were looking for illegal fishing. And so a lot of times there are kind of commercial, real-world parallel situations that you can be solving for. But then again, Kris, to your point, it's what's the problem that you're trying to solve? Bringing those pieces together. And so Kelly, so have you seen that working here so far? I mean, are you able to have conversations with folks around the problem before you get to the procurement level, or is that still difficult to do?
I think that there are pockets of both, and we'd like to see more of the pockets of true collaboration. But I think that there is a recognition and willingness from all sectors that we can do better. One of the things Australia is not short on, it's great ideas, great capability, good talent. So we have all the right ingredients at our disposal. And if we are focused on tapping into that holistically, and we want to work together, I think there's nothing that could get in our way. And we actually even have the capital, both private and government, which together could fund anything that we set our minds to. So I think we just have to tap into that willingness and spread it further, and maybe be a bit bolder when it comes to some of the more traditional procurement processes, et cetera, and create the space for people to set them aside until later in the process.
Thank you.
Yeah, the way you make a sports car go fast is you add lightness to the sports car, right?
Add lightness.
You add lightness. That's a Lotus quote, I'm pretty sure. And the one thing we don't have in Australian innovation scene is lightness, unfortunately. And I take umbrage, and anyone who knows me knows that the level of hatred I have for the distaste I have for the level of involvement of the university sector in innovation in Australia. They are a wet blanket when it comes to bringing anything of use to the market, and that's actually being polite. And this is an investor who, literally. So one of our gateway decision points for actually rejecting investment is: does a university have an involvement? Yes, reject. You need to look at that, because there is so much good IP in these side universities. If I was the IP research czar in Australia, I'd put it all on eBay and sell it and see what it's worth. They will leave perfectly good research languishing inside a university because they're scared of missing $1 in case they miss the next Wi-Fi or cochlear implant or hypersonic jet engine or whatever it might be. But as a result, so much sits in cupboards, gatewayed by people who think they're commercially clever because they're in a large organisation.
But why do you think that? I mean, why do you think that that's a wet blanket, and how? I mean, a lot of universities in the US are the same way. A few have kind of tapped into getting it right, but it's few.
Yeah, well, so I don't have a great deal of exposure to US universities, so I probably couldn't make the direct comparison. But I know that the amount of conversations you have with universities regarding, and you don't mind if there's like a sensible commercial agreement for access to IP or royalty or something like that, but as soon as they get control, you have an academic who's got a PhD or more, one or more PhDs, who all of a sudden thinks they're a commercial genius. That's a recipe for ruin for that business. Right. So, but all the time, and you'll see universities want to take 60, 70% IP control of businesses. Equity control of businesses because of the IP. IP that the Australian government basically underwrote through debt, through students and research and all the rest of it. So it's not their IP, it's our IP. So no conversation innovation can be had here without understanding university and the higher education research sector in general. I put CSIRO and Data 621 and a few others in this category as well. They need to literally get out of the way, add lightness, get out of the way.
So you being an investor, so in the Valley, if they see a solid, scientific team or engineering team with good IP, but realize very quickly they need to put like a CEO type, a business person in charge, of the company. Is that our investors will just do that? They will take somebody out of a CEO role and make them the CTO and then add. Is that something that is done here? Is that something that? Because if there's good tech, you don't want to lose that, right?
Well, I also take that a lot of times that doesn't happen, and I think in the mid-2000s, the likes of Andreessen and Horowitz and others, A16Z, reset that and actually enable founders. So there's been a shift, but that's more in the software tech and not capital space, so I get that. We don't, so I think Australia's more followed a shadow of that, to be honest, over the time there. So I don't necessarily believe it's required. So when I got a job with Google in 2008, went over, hadn't prepared for the interview, flew over for a day, never go to America for a day. And so I thought, I'll read their annual report as research for this job interview, right? And so reading through, I like annual reports, it's pretty crazy. And I've gone to the IP section at the back, all the boilerplate crud you get in the back of these things. And I've gone through that and I've gone like, okay, I read that it was Stanford IP. and they were paying Stanford, I want to say it was a 3% revenue
It is
royalty on that
3%
IP.
royalty.
And then there was 2.5 pages about what they were doing to remove that code, so they no longer had to pay that royalty. And so I thought, if you only had a 3% revenue royalty to a university in Australia, you'd be dancing with joy.
Yeah.
And here they're openly admitting to actually trying to jack the code out. So and they would have by now, that was 2008. Give that the situation in Queensland.
Stanford made their money, to be fair.
They don't do too bad. The situation in Queensland, the QUT are currently suing one of their startups over royalty issues. That's the polar opposites for you.
I just want to suggest that there's a different virtuous circle that exists in US universities, which is the founders who go on and make a lot of money from this IP actually donate back to the universities. So there's also an onus on the corporates and the successful founders of companies to then contribute back, and that philanthropic bent towards universities is not as developed in Australia, and it's much, much more developed in the US. So I think we actually have to look at the whole ecosystem and how it works together to get the right outcome, recognizing that one of the challenges in Australia is that comparably, we don't have the same scale. And commercialization success in Australia is not the same as commercialization success in a market that's much bigger or global success. So what can we do between the large, small companies, the government, et cetera, to promote our innovation and entrepreneurship globally, and to build those commercialization skills to help supplement the great ideas and capabilities that we know exist here, but aren't necessarily being exploited to their full potential.
That behaviour with respect to US grants is incentivised. There are taxation reasons why wealthy people, we don't have that in Australia. So if I understand that right.
That's why the whole ecosystem could evolve to create a different virtuous cycle if we chose.
But it's not a like-for-like situation. If you had that same tax incentive here, I'm sure that, I don't know why you give it to university, you might as well give it to a homeless man on the street, he'd do better with it. But, sorry, I've got some issues with universities, as you can tell.
Yes, we can tell.
Well, when they demonstrate they can do better, my issues will go away. So that would be what I say there. So, but you just can't apples to apples compare when the systems are so different, is what I'm getting at.
Maybe I can add there. Maybe we can take advantage of both the capabilities. So what we are doing with some of our customers, we are looking into, when they are looking into a capability they're looking for, we look into what's out there already, somebody already doing something about this. Maybe they got 50% of the solution, 70% of the solution. And then we start looking into what are the gaps where industry is not investing. This is where most probably we can work with our research partners. We work with universities that, hey, this is an area, for example, when we start looking at cybersecurity, we start looking into different specialization, and we start identifying that this is a gap in the industry capability. We are not investing in this, or industry is not investing in this. How can we work with our research partners to invest into this area? How can we work with government? This is the area most probably where they can invest, because this is where you need core research capability.
Right.
So most probably, I think there is opportunity to do both.
I think part of the reason, something we found with getting investors together, just because that's what I do every day, what we found is when you have world-class talent and world-class technology, usually the first place they go is to talk to investors. And so a lot of times, and I say this with all the love of my heart, the only people better at being stealth than the US military are startups. Who want to be first to market and who want to stay quiet and stay stealth, but their investors know what's going on. And we have various cycles, we will not get into it, funding cycles in the US government that take a few years, 3 years typically. And I think if governments were aware of these stealth capabilities of world-class talent and world-class technology that are happening everywhere, and again, don't have to make them public, but I think having our frankly, our militaries and our intelligence communities understand what's coming down, where those gaps are, because I think we don't even know sometimes, what's being developed.
You know who sees what's being developed is the elephant in the room. The Chinese are in Silicon Valley across the innovation ecosystems, and they have a philosophy of spray and pray. That they are investing everywhere. They're not strategic investors like we tend to be, but they invest everywhere to see what's going to come up. And not only are they investing, but they're getting in earlier. They're sending interns VCs who
Yes.
review all the pitches.
And have full access to their databases of IP.
Yeah, and have real visibility into what's coming down the pike and what's going to be available. And this is something that, free societies, we want to have, people of all nationalities working in our investment sector, but it's a vulnerability that we have because we often lose ability to keep some of these technologies stealth from our potential adversaries, and that's something that you and I have worked on, cap table hygiene, you like exorcism, and removing adversaries from cap tables. But even before there's an investment, there is often Chinese are already seeing
a lot of
what we're
diligence
doing.
happening. So let's talk about adversarial capital, shall we? So Linda and I work on this all the time. In Australia, what is this top of mind? I'm asking honestly. We are looking at, like I said, the billions and billions of dollars that have flown into the United States alone. And how that access is being used and being used to steal, frankly. Is that something that you guys think about, or aware of, or feeling?
No, it's a headline issue in Australia when it comes to like the Port of Darwin or a large cattle station. That's about it really too, and that's more of a foreign investment in general thing as opposed to defence, I think. Mm-hmm. We, in the industries of national significance, let's call them, defence space, we don't have enough capital as it is. There's nowhere near enough private capital in that space. So we also have a lot of routes for that potential adversarial capital come in through the, I'll probably get this wrong, SOV and POV visas, significant investment visa and something else, premium. But it was used by a lot of Southeast Asian investors to come into Australia on a visa and to get money out of those, China, places that don't treat capital well. So not so much, but we're underwhelmed for capital. So we're somewhat capital starved in these industries, because of, as far as I'm concerned, ESG.
And are there rules? I mean, so CFIUS, go ahead.
Right, but Australia is now considered an accepted state for CFIUS purposes. So you do have a good foreign investment regime, and so maybe that's going to be changing.
Well, we changed FIRB during COVID. I mean, it used to be 5. Well, I can't. Yeah, you're talking about I'm not prepared to talk about FIRB. I'm sorry, my brain.
The foreign investment review process.
Yeah. But in general, it's a $5 million, and I think during COVID, with Chinese companies, it got set to 0, I want to say. So if you have a transaction of more than 5 million, I might have these numbers wrong. If there's a regulator out there, let me know. Then you have to get Treasurer's approval, the Treasury Department, or some element of government, some council of wise people get to vet your commercial decision. Yay.
It's always a council of wise people.
So, and that got lowered during COVID because there was a concern regarding companies Chinese companies snapping up Australian businesses that were distressed.
Right.
I don't know if that's been lifted. I'm not sure, to be honest. But it was also an inbound investment. But FIRB's pretty easy. We've had a lot of foreign investment. FIRB's pretty easy. As long as you haven't got...
Because the review is for national security. It's not whether it's a good business decision. It's whether it causes a risk to national security.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do need to have robust processes. And I think FIRB, as you would expect, must keep adapting their processes to be fit for purpose. But I don't think that's an imposition. I think, as Steve is saying, Australia has long been a place that wants to attract foreign capital. And I think we do good with that foreign capital. I know Optus has certainly been a beneficiary of a lot of foreign capital coming into Australia. We spend $1.5 billion a year on research, development, and infrastructure investment in this country. And I think that's very important. It means we have competition in one of the most critical infrastructure sectors that everybody is reliant on. And we want to continue to do so in a safe way that supports national security.
We do rely on inbound foreign investment. Australia as a continent, our extents fit inside the continental US, if you know what I mean. So from point to point, 23 million people who mostly live on the East Coast, we just need, we're like 0.7% of the world's GDP. We need foreign investment for a place this size, right?
Got it. So Linda, so you talked a little bit about our process. So what is our process as far as doing that review? I mean, I'm like, what are we I'm not even, you know what I'm asking.
How does CFIUS work?
Thank you.
So what happened, I mean, there are several ways to come into CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. The committee is comprised of 9 agencies. It's chaired by the Treasury Department. And I'm going to go around the room and think about who's on it. Department of Energy, Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security. You've got U.S. Trade Representative's Office. You've got the Office of Science and Technology Policy, which was my seat. State Department, Defense Department, Commerce Department, is that 9? And then we have the intelligence community as providing inputs, and any other agencies that are relevant, the Department of Agriculture, where relevant, et cetera. And it's a voluntary process, mostly. It's a joint filing, mostly, with the acquirer and the acquired companies filing jointly and explaining the transaction. Sometimes it's not joint, and sometimes it's not voluntary. If it's not voluntary, if it is a state-run investor or company. Or a critical technology area, certain technology areas.
Is there a transaction? I've done US transactions. What's the transaction size? I've never come across it.
It could be. I mean, there's not a. It's not hard and fast. It depends on the technology and on the sense of control, the amount of control that the investor is getting. But it is the committee then reviews the transaction for risk to national security arising from that transaction. And if there is identified a risk, the committee can do one of 3 things. It can clear a transaction and you get safe harbor and the government won't knock on your door again. You can get, the committee can recommend to the president that he block the transaction. And that's done rarely. And then in most cases, it's mitigation. So there's a national security agreement that's agreed between the government and the parties to mitigate any risk. There's also a non-notified process, which means you think you got away with your transaction, you didn't notify the government, and the government, but you crow about it in the FT or on the Wall Street Journal.
So
and
we
you say,
see you, we're watching you a little bit.
And so we have teams who read the open source press and say, that transaction looks like it could cause a risk to national security. Yeah. We invite the parties in. If they don't come in, we can bring them in. And then again, we can clear, mitigate, or unwind the transaction in that case.
How long does that process typically take?
So it starts out a 45-day clock. And then for review, there could be a 45-day investigation. And then there can be extensions. You can withdraw and refile.
Many extensions, usually.
So we try to get them done quickly because we recognize that this is, these are investments and they have to go through. But there have been cases that have gone on excessively.
I think the point that I'm trying to make is we've been working in the private sector on the investment side to go left of CFIUS. Instead of making CFIUS better, stronger, how do we avoid it altogether? How do we make sure that mission critical companies, national significant companies, can find clean funding, can find patriotic funding, and frankly, for some of these, for some of these industries that are very capital intensive, commercial space, quantum, that have to raise hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. How do we make sure that they don't lose momentum and can keep rolling? I have 9,000 more. It looks like we have a couple questions, sir.
Work?
Testing.
It's on?
Yep. Yes.
Right. My name's Serdar Beykan. I'm the founding director of Solar Space Technologies for Australia. It's to bring baseload, dispatchable, zero carbon emission electricity from space to Australia. And I've been working on that for nearly 5 years. And I'm fortunate, and I can understand the banality that Steve describes in terms of what he's saying. But also in Australia, we have the most extraordinary people. And at the top level of scientists, architects, engineers, Olympians, etc., and most extraordinary people. I also would like to just talk about David and what he's gone through with hypersonics to get those things. I've been fortunate to this time because I have other companies that have been funding my endeavour, but it's a extraordinary endeavour to actually do, and it needs vast amounts of money, but it will provide energy, which is the biggest critical technology that no one is really talking about, for the world from space, and we will be a net energy exporter as baseload energy to anywhere in a millisecond and instantaneously from geostationary orbit on giant satellites that we've designed and so that we can put together. What I would suggest that in your discussion is that Australia and the United States, but in particular Australia, as Eric Schmidt spoke, we're smaller, is that we have to reimagine our nation. And how we're going to do that is to say we will be on the front foot because we share the same space as China. And China is actually working on this technology. And let me tell you that whoever gets there first bags the space. And imagine a world in 20, 30 years from now where China provides to all countries in our region and around the world incredibly cheap energy that's limitless for the next 5.5 billion years, and where the West, and in particular Australia, is going to be. And I think for that, you need to reimagine your investment systems, both government and the private sector, to actually support companies such as mine. And I'd like you to know, and the Commonwealth Bank is actually my bank, your board member is actually my neighbour, and so the reality is that all they do, she's a lawyer, nothing against lawyers, but they just see risks and nothing else. And so the reality is, what do you actually are going to do to create an environment where democracies will in fact grab this opportunity to maintain our freedoms and our liberties into the future? Thank you.
If I might, it sounds like a really exciting technology. It sounds too good to be true to me, but we're a big user of energy at Optus, and we also are the only sovereign owner and operator of satellites, so it sounds like we could have a lot to talk about. So maybe you should come and see us.
It strikes me we actually are buying our power from China now thanks to solar panels, so they've already won. Sorry.
On the solar panels,
it was a facetious comment. I'll leave it there. Sorry.
it's intermittent and it's not base load and it's not dispatchable.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Sir?
Hi, good morning. Great presentation. I'm Mark Manandan from Pacific Forum. My question, two quick question. I think the first one would be, what would be the impact, and Linda has alluded to this in her opening remarks as well, and Heather, what would be the impact of CHIPS Act to the VC culture in Silicon Valley, and how it's going to change the investment sort of landscape in the Bay Area? I think relatedly, my second question is, and I was been keen to ask this in the panel of Danielle earlier, but how is Australia thinking about industrial policy to fast-track its innovation prospects in cutting-edge technologies? And I say this in the backdrop of Japan passing its economic security law. South Korea just passed its own CHIPS Act, and of course the Biden administration is pursuing the CHIPS Act and the Science Act. So I'm just interested to ask our Australian colleagues and also everybody in the audience, is Australia already thinking about its own industrial policies such as CHIPS Act to really not just be in the wave of onshoring and capability shoring, but also really ramping up its efforts to develop its cutting-edge technologies? Thank you so much.
You want to start?
Well, that was a terrific question, and I'd love to hear the answer to the second part. With respect to CHIPS and Science Act, that is directing government programs, and we hope that that is signaling to the VC community of which companies to invest in, and investing in the sector altogether, both in terms of manufacturing. You know, VCs, as many of you know, will invest in a dog walking app in like 2 seconds, but investing in hardware, in fabs, in in chips, I mean, that's hard. And you have to have a lot more patient capital to make those investments. And so we hope that the CHIPS and Science Act will signal that these are really critical technologies at all stages of chip fabs and design and packaging. So hope that the VCs will follow there.
I'll throw a little bit more onto that real quickly. So there's $1 billion of that money that's for innovation. That hasn't been assigned yet or awarded yet. But from that, and I know they've been out here in Australia, is a group called the America's Frontiers Fund, which has actually been established by Gilman Louie. He's actually the gentleman that established Incutel, which is the CIA's investment arm. So if you hear about AFF, America's Frontiers Fund, amazing group. I know they've been out here talking about their efforts, but
they're not the only VCs in the space.
They're not the only VC in the space, but there already is a ground. They're already getting attention. Linda talks about patient capital. We've had conversations with a number of, we'll call them high net worth individuals, family offices within the United States. Like Linda said, it's patient capital, generational wealth, 20 to 30 year stuff. And so as Steve was talking about incentives that you guys have here in Australia, we're also looking to align incentives for that kind of patient generational capital. So it won't look like a traditional VC model. It'll be a much different model. Sir?
The second part of the question. Sorry, industrial policy.
Yeah, the second part of the question is nothing particular. We're 23 million people. We can barely staff industries now, so manpower's an issue. But we have amazing industry policy. I'm a libertarian and not a huge fan of big government. We have the R&D tax concession, which is a 43% tax rebate essentially for spending things on R&D. That's an amazing benefit to set up in Australia. And we have, as an investor, if you invest appropriately, you get a 10 to 20% tax credit on the way in and no capital gains tax on the way out. So if people tell me there's no tax incentives here, I think that they're misaligned, but that they do exist and they can be maybe tuned. But they really probably don't understand the level of, the sometimes ruinous level of support we provide industry to in Australia.
Great question. Sir?
Jamie Gator from ASPE. My question is from the background as an academic, and I would like the panel's top 3 points on what they would ask of the Australian government in order to make academics have incentives that better align them to deliver work that's of value to VCs and investors. At the moment, the incentives are aligned towards publishing in high-impact journals, which made our work on the critical tech tracker much easier. But how can we help pivot that? What would be the top 3 things each of you would ask of the Australian government?
So seeing as I've probably the most opinions in this space,
Nothing,
I would, and as I said before, I don't have a problem with the quality of the research and the product. I have a problem with it gets out. So I would literally empty the cupboards, I'll put it all out on eBay and see what it's worth. Because there's no point leaving it in the cupboard. So you have to be biased and you have to be incentivised towards kicking the stuff out the door and seeing if it, because if no one pays for it, it's the market's assessed its value. It's zero, right? So it's a cute piece of technology, but who really cares? That and just a recognition of the fact that universities and research in Australia is publicly underwritten, if not funded. And to think they can hold on to that IP with some ridiculous arrangement, that just needs to come to Jesus moment, I think, to be honest, to sort of say, wake up to yourselves. And that will probably be done through funding. That's the only 2 I can think of.
So those are the outcomes that you're after, but what would be the mechanism through which you'd achieve that?
So,
what incentives would you adjust in terms of performance metrics of individual academics or universities so that they change their focus?
Well, I mean, also,
or anyone else on the panel would.
I don't know about Australian universities.
Maybe one of them is focus on invention, not reinvention. Because that's what we have seen a lot of time, and a lot of universities that we are working with, actually, they're 100% aligned with that they wanted to focus on invent, not reinvent. And that's what most probably is a big value for the commercial sector. Commercialization is one of the aspects that most probably universities can improve, working with the industry, but also working with the government. So most probably those 2 areas.
Because I think the comment you made earlier that if a university is involved, that's a bit of a flag to not fund something. I think everyone in the room would like the opposite to be true, and I think if we can all put it
it's control. So, and my point on that was control. So it's when the academics they have too much control through equity ownership, or super board rights, or some other crazy crap that they come up with. Excuse me. So, and I've seen it all from universities. It's horrible. So, so to your point, maybe no one gets to start a new research project until they commercialise or basically put up on eBay the IP from the last one. That's obviously a euphemism, but how do you actually put that IP out there to sort of say, this is up for sale under these conditions, if you know what I mean? So,
write it up as a KPI of a grant that's provided. When money's provided, one of the conditions is that, a certain percentage of the effort is to translate it into usable technology and work with
well, you
people.
can't do that because then you won't. I mean, you still have to create knowledge for knowledge's sakes, right? So, and some things will come of that. Someone paid Albert Einstein to sit in an office and think about light at one stage, and we have GPS because of it, right? So you can't do that. But I'm probably sort of saying is, the university, the academics have to take their claws off it and to have it freely marketable before they get to work on something else. I don't know exactly how you do that because I don't.
I'll do like a 20 seconds. So at Stanford, they'll do something where like a professor, a lot of the professors, especially from like the business school, engineering school, have come from the private sector, actually, and come in. They're not so worried about tenure. They've kind of made their money. But those that are and those that are publishing, they can take sabbaticals and they don't lose their tenure and they can go out and actually take the team of, it's usually students teams, right? But you've got some ownership, some leadership there and actually help them. And it, Silicon Valley is a very wired and networked place, but from the academics to the investors. I mean, they all know each other forever, and I think that's...
And there's no sort of stigma attached to academics moving into business and back and forward. So I would actually tackle the question as how do we evolve our thinking about what it means to be an academic. That's not something the government can fix, but that's about how we as a society don't consider research tarnished or impure because there's a commercial application of that.
Great point.
And if we can get that right atmosphere happening and get more cross-pollination and movement between the sectors, that should benefit everybody.
I would just add on that to create an environment of research security to ensure that people aren't getting grants as part of the 1,000 Talents program, that they're not beholden to other governments or research, sending research abroad, that the research that's created here stays here and is Australian.
Thank you.
So I think I have a related question. I'm Michael Whitbrook. I'm a professor of AI at the University of Auckland in New Zealand, where I think we have similar problems. I've also got a startup which requires very patient capital. I spent most of my career in the United States working in part for people like you, Linda, and also in both startups and in sort of large tech research organizations. And in the US, I think things are not quite as black and white between the likes of Australia and New Zealand as is perhaps been stated, right? In the US, the large, very successful, high-powered universities tend to have this view of wait until someone gives us a building, right, after we succeed. I think that's a great thing. But the second-rate universities do things like the commercialization branches in Australia and New Zealand universities, which, by the way, are not at all run by academics, right? They're run by business people who somehow have got a foot into the universities and whose mission is to stifle innovation by trying to extract value from it. Right? So what can we do in the near term to provide an incentive for transitioning from this IP capture mentality, right, to a value creation mentality for our countries, right, and for the parts of civilization that we would like to value? How can we, in fact, provide capital long enough term to do real innovation? I'm trying to build brain-computer interfaces out of biology. That is not fast, right? How can we actually provide support for those sorts of things instead of just complaining that everything's broken at the moment? Sorry to mischaracterize perhaps or to be...
Well, I would say...
How much of the IP do you own? How much of that IP do you own?
For that, all of it. Because I had it before I went to the university.
Oh, right, okay. But if development's not a university, how much would you own? And I'd say it wouldn't be all of it, it'd be a very small part of it.
Actually, at the University of Auckland, maybe 80 to 90%, so it's perhaps not as bad as the situation you described, but that's still kind of that is still potentially harmful. Yeah.
So you set up the question as if IP were a bad thing, were preventing innovation, and I would argue quite the opposite, that IP incentivizes innovation, that if you don't have the expectation you're going to be able to profit from your time innovating, you're going to spend your time breaking rocks or something.
I think it's a mixed bag, but I'd love to have a discussion with you.
I didn't include in my bio that I started my career as a lawyer in the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and the World Intellectual Property Organization. So
Surprise.
I'm an IP lawyer at heart.
All right, and last question, because we're way over time. Sorry, guys.
Hi, I'm Amit Mehta. I represent the Corporate Treasury Association of Australia. So I had a career of over 30 years in the UK and worked for a large industrial group. So we had internal entrepreneurs as well looking at this stuff in cooperation with business and university and various things. My question here is, what do you think of the German model? And we can accept that they have created a lot of things, of the Fraunhofer Institutes and the Max Planck Institutes that they've got. And so I'd like your opinion. And what we saw in the UK, for taking Steve's point, was the EIS schemes and SIES schemes, which did bring a lot of private capital in. But what I can say is there's so many of them just sitting in universities who got that capital and actually squandered it. It sits there, and God knows what happens with those companies. They have huge portfolios of just. So I don't know whether that's the most efficient way. I do get your point that there's too much property investment, and you need to get a little risky. And how do you incentivize that? But I don't have an answer for that. Anyway.
I mean, how do you incentivize it? There's tax. You can get a 20% tax credit on the way in and no tax on the way out. I don't know what more incentive people need. So I don't know anything about those European institutes, I'm sorry, but the other point I was going to make, I've forgotten, so I'll shut up.
I was going to bring us back to this idea of deep problem exploration. I think that is the most important thing we can do. And to bring us back to the topic of creating value and competitive advantage for Australia, the other most significant thing we can all do is invest in talent. Growing talent, reskilling talent, changing our models and mindset about the kind of talent that we value and want to invest in. And moving away from this model where people study for 4 years and then they're supposed to have a career that lasts another 40 years. So that's investing in micro-credentials, reskilling, immigration policy, changing the way we think about curriculum and what the right skills are in an AI-enabled world. I think there's so much we can do to foster even greater talent for Australia for now and into the future. And you couple that with a mindset of deep problem exploration, and I think that's where the magic happens.
Please help me thank Kelly, Steve, Linda, and Kris. Thank you, guys.